John Grisham, the author of 35 novels, including The Firm, Pelican Brief, and Client. He is here for A Time for Mercy, which is the latest Jake Brigance book, and now I realize I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, so apologies in advance, which who first made an appearance for A Time to Kill. And I believe this is the third appearance, also can be corrected. This is our first time hosting John Grisham. We're so honored to have him. Virtual clapping, thank you for coming. Nick Petrie is the author of 6, soon to be 6. Thank you all.
All right, well, thanks to Boswell, of course, for having us. Thanks to John Grisham for making the trek to his office to join us virtually. We'll talk a little, maybe take a few questions from the audience if I think we figured out how to do that. So let's get started. Thanks, John, for coming. Most of your books deal with legal issues, some more complex than others, but they're really often serious, complex moral issues. You build a story around, for example, the death penalty or wrongful incarceration or for-profit law schools. So with all of that said, what was the impetus for A Time for Mercy? Where did the book come from?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Nick, thank you for moderating or hosting or whatever you're doing, being the guy there in Milwaukee. Thanks to Boswell for having me, and I'm delighted to be here virtually. I'd love to be there personally because I started touring a little bit 3 years ago, and I realized how much I love to go to new bookstores and check them out and browse, and I always invite local writers to come in, and we started doing podcasts with every location, every bookstore, and so it was a lot of fun. Plan to do it this year, we've got plans for change, but always happy to be in Milwaukee, and thank all you folks for tuning in. So where did the idea for Time for Mercy come from? Most of my books go back to something that really happened, a true event. And there was a case I heard about, didn't read about it, but I heard about it probably 10 years ago involving a 15-year-old kid who was living in a very bad situation, and he was being abused, and he got his hands on a gun and he pulled the trigger. And the issue was, was then and is now with the Time for Mercy, how do you handle teenage killers who pull the trigger and do as much damage as an adult? And so that's what happens, and that was the inspiration for the story. The real inspiration was Jake Brigance, that you did pronounce it correctly. This is the third book that kind of features Jake. Time to Kill was first. Sycamore Row was 2013. And now 7 years later, here's Jake again, another big courtroom drama involving an unpopular murder client. And, I've always wanted to bring Jake back. I kind of have to wait till I have the story. And also he's a small town lawyer in Mississippi, where I was 30 years ago. You can't have a big dramatic murder trial every other year. It just doesn't happen that way. So I'm kind of spacing them out, thinking about the next story, and it'll be a few years.
So what do you get writing a Jake Brigance novel that you don't get writing one of your contemporary thrillers? What's different about a Jake Brigance novel for you?
They are in some ways easier because I know the area so well. I know the geography, I know the history, I know the culture, the people, the characters of the small towns. That's what I created beginning in 1985 when I started writing A Time to Kill. That was the locale, but that's kind of where I grew up. I know the small town courthouses and lawyers and judges and clerks and cops, and that's kind of where I come from. And that's what I enjoy writing, because it is, I think you write about what you know, you write about where you come from, you write about families and friends, and it's just I think a deeper, richer book because of that. A lot of my legal thrillers could be set anywhere in the world, or certainly anywhere in the U.S. A lot of them are in Washington, some are in Florida, but I mean, I could almost put them anywhere. but A Time to Kill in those books from Ford County are kind of special to me, because A Time to Kill is a very autobiographical story. When I began writing in 1985, I was that small town lawyer in a small, place in Mississippi, and that was my courthouse, and those are my judges and friends, and that's all I knew. And I was struggling like Jake in a small town practice, and dreaming of success, dreaming of the big courtroom drama. That's what lawyers dream of. And so I kind of lived that, and was really barely scraping by living as a lawyer. So Jake, where the story come from? It comes from Jake. They all come from Jake, and the next one will too. And I just don't know when it's going to be, but those are my favorite books to write.
You've said in previous interviews that you never really enjoyed being a lawyer that much. And what is it about the legal world that really captured your imagination back then as a writer, and still seems to captivate you today?
Yeah, well, it's stories. We're storytellers, and there's so many great stories that you run across as a lawyer, because you deal with so much human suffering and misery and conflict, and people who really screwed up their lives, and they come to you for help. And most lawyers are really good storytellers, and most lawyers are very bad writers, but they can tell stories. And so I'm fascinated by the legal profession and the law and injustice and a lot of issues. You mentioned a few of them that still keep me awake at night. I mean, I correspond with several guys who are still in prison, innocent people that I'm trying to get out, and we can't get them out. But I know these people very well. And so that drives me to write about issues dealing with what's wrong with our criminal justice system. And so I'm still trying to get those stories out.
Well, so going back to kind of writing and storytelling, do you think being a trial lawyer helped you as a storyteller, or do you think you were a storyteller and that's why you became a trial lawyer?
No, I was never a storyteller. I grew up in a family of storytellers. Father and grandfather were big yarn spinners and could tell all kinds of true stories about the family there were 10 different versions of, and I heard that's what I grew up with. A lot of good material there. And I captured most of those stories and put them in a book called A Painted House. It came out about 20 years ago. It's kind of a fictionalized childhood memoir. No, I think I was a lawyer before I started seeing the material. And again, from day one as a lawyer in a small town, especially a practice where, you really can't control who comes in the door, and a lot of your clients can't pay you, and all the gossip, all the policemen, all the judges. You just hear a lot of good stories. You hear a lot of good material, and most of it's not worth writing about or even repeating, but there are some very good stories. I get a lot of mail from lawyers in prison, and yeah, there are a lot of them. And I would take a look, but then I realized it's a good way to get sued. If I were to use something 10 years later that I read somewhere, the lawyer would probably get upset. So I stopped reading them a long time ago, but I read a few, and they're really fascinating stories. Think about a lawyer in prison. That's a good story. How do you get there? How do you get there? What happened? That's that's a good story. And so that's where a lot of my stuff comes from, is watching lawyers, law firms, courts, appeals, dockets, litigation. That's where I live. I live in the legal world, and I'm always collecting stories.
Well, this book really comes full circle from A Time to Kill, your first book. They're similar in theme and subject matter. It's not just Jake that carries through. So how do you think your work has changed over that 30 plus year span?
there's been no deliberate effort to change. I mean, I've never tried to write any other way. There's been a change in the material, and there's been a change in the social consciousness, going back about 15 years. About 15 years ago, I wrote a book called The Innocent Man, which is still my only work of nonfiction. It's about wrongful convictions. And researching that book really threw me into the world of wrongful convictions, and I realized how many innocent people are in prison. There are a lot of them, and most people don't believe that, but it's true. And once I realized it and believed it, and got into the research, you know, when you start talking about innocent people in prison, it brings up all kinds of other ancillary issues: the death penalty, long sentences, no parole, mass incarceration. These are all issues that came out of that. And so I became really, I think for the first time in my life, even as a former criminal defense lawyer, I became really concerned about our system and the injustices in our systems. And so I started writing about it. And that's, I think my work changed. My wife gets frustrated occasionally. She'll say, okay, get out of the pulpit, get off the soapbox, stop preaching, and just go write a good old fashioned legal thriller with no big issue in the middle of it. So I get that from her at home.
I'm interested in social issues as well. And you know, my books all have some different social issue carrying through. And it is a challenge to not preach. Yeah. But it's not something I've ever thought that you did. You take an issue that's interesting, and you really show us, like in a Time for Mercy, you really show us all sides of this issue.
Yeah.
And I'm not. I mean, I assume that's something you do deliberately.
I've always believed that just because I have a platform doesn't allow me the right to assume my readers share my politics. Most of them probably do, but I don't assume that. I don't want to, really offend any reader. But at the same time, if you look at the way I write and what I write about, it's pretty clear where I stand on a lot of issues. And I kind of keep that in mind. I don't want to beat people over the head. There's a big issue in A Time for Mercy that I don't really explore the way I thought I might. And the issue is, the story takes place in 1990. The laws were different back then, and throughout the death belt in the death states, and that's a majority of the states, back then you could still put a teenager on trial for capital murder. And you can't now. The Supreme Court stopped it about 20 years ago. And so, but the issue is, even today, for kids who commit horrible murders, what's the appropriate sentence? The victim's just as dead. The family's just as lonely without their loved one. If the kid's 15 and pulls a trigger, it's the same damage as the kid's 40 and pulls a trigger. So, and then that's the issue. But I don't spend a lot of time fleshing out, primarily, Nick, because I don't have the answer. Jake makes the point a couple times in the story. Drew Gamble, his client, the 16-year-old who murdered a deputy sheriff. If the case were to be handled in youth court, Drew is 16. He would serve 2 years. At the age of 18, youth court jurisdiction vanishes, and he's free to walk out. Well, 2 years is not enough for what he did, if you believe he's guilty. So that's the issue, but I did not spend a lot of time exploring that issue.
Well, you didn't mentioning it makes it clear that there is no great answer, and I guess I think that's the thing that I admire most about this. There are a lot of people with a big platform, as you say, who are so certain that they're right about these very complex issues, and we've kind of solved the easy problems. We're really looking at the much harder problems, and that's one of the things I appreciate is how not even-handed. I mean, your point of view is evident, but you're not you're not throwing rocks at people. You're not, there are no straw targets here.
Right. Right.
So you don't have a deliberate practice in the course of your work year or the cycle of a book to get better. Are there exercises that you do? Is there reading that you do? Are you trying to stretch, or are you saying to yourself, I know how to do this. I've done it before. I'm just going to do the next thing. You've written 40 books. I can't believe you don't pay attention to the craft of it.
Yeah, very much so. When I start a new book, every year when I start a new book, I tell myself, slow down and make this the best book you've ever written. That's still the goal. Sure, I could crank them out, and be sloppy, and some editor's going to fix it, and they'll publish the book, and it'll sell for a while. A lot of big time writers do that. They get lazy, and they don't want to be edited. They don't want to outline and plan their story. That's their problem. I could do that, but I care very much about the craft, because I want the book to be the best one I've written. I want the book to deliver what the readers expect, and that's to be very entertained by the story. And I want the pages to turn. I want, as a thriller or a suspense writer, I want it to work at every level. So I spent a lot of time, thinking about that. And, I think the craft was developed many books ago. This is the way I write. I wouldn't know how to stretch. I wouldn't know how to. I wouldn't know what I was reaching for. Sure, I'll read a great book by a great writer, and I'll say, I will never be able to write like that. I don't really want to try, because that's imitation. I'll read a book by a lesser writer and say, okay, I can beat that. I've always done that. I've always been very honest about my own work.
So in the course of writing a book, so I've read some interviews of yours. So you start a new legal thriller the 1st of January every year, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so, and you're an outliner. You plan ahead.
Yes.
So what happens along the way? Does that plan evolve along the way? Are you someone who says, is this an 80-page outline for a 400-page book? Kind of, what does that process look like?
Well, the outline can vary. It's usually about, what does it look like? I go to chapter 1, I write a paragraph. What's going to happen in chapter 1? Just a paragraph. Then chapter 2, chapter 3, and you work through it. It takes a long time. It's no fun. You want to start writing. When I get to chapter 40, I should be, close to the end. So that's what it looks like. I constantly revise that as I write. But I always know where I'm going, and so it's hard to get lost if you always know where you're going. And you can't. It's impossible to outline everything. It's impossible to predict what's going to happen in the middle of a book. I'm pleasantly surprised many times by characters that pop up that are needed, or subplots you don't need, or whatever. But there's this constant revision. Every morning when I start at about 7 or 7:30, I go back and read what I've written the day before, or what I wrote the day before. And that's a lot of editing. You clean up the work you've just written. You spend some time with that. It also gets you back into the rhythm of the story, and you know where you're going all of a sudden. I always know where I'm going, but again, I don't know what's going to happen, everything that's going to happen every chapter. So, but there's a constant reworking, even away from the desk. And I can't write for more than 4 hours at a time. It's almost nonstop. And after 4 hours, my brain is mush. I have to go do something physical, even if it's just go for a long walk in the woods. So get away from it, and then but I'm still thinking about it. It lives with you. It lives with me the whole time, because I'll think of a great idea of driving down the highway. It may be a piece of dialogue. I may hear somebody use a word I'm not familiar with, or a phrase, or slang, or whatever, you know, yeah, as you know, we're always, writers are thieves. We're always writing down everything we hear.
Right.
Or a great name, or another subplot maybe. It's just a constant process.
So it's the outline is a living thing. The outline is evolving as you go.
Yes, sir. It changes all the time. I have it on the desk by me. I'm making notes into the outline. I'm trying to remember, you know, when I use a new name in chapter 14, I have to make myself stop and write that name down, and something about the character, because you'll forget it. You know,
Right.
And then, you know, if the guy is 47 years old in chapter 13, why is he 77, you know, 2 years later? And that's what the copy editors will catch in New York. They'll, if you don't catch it, somebody's going to catch it, you hope. And so it's just easier. It's easier if you slow down a notch and write it down as you go through it, and save yourself a lot of work.
Have you ever abandoned something partway through? You ever say, you know what, I conceived of this all wrong. It's beyond saving, or it's not worth the time it's going to take to start this again, to save this thing?
There's been one false start. About 20 years or so ago, I had this brilliant idea for a novel, a legal thriller called The King of Torts, which later became one of my books. But this was the first attempt at The King of Torts, and I really, it was based on the Union Carbide disaster in Bhopal, India, where there was a leak in a big chemical plant, and it killed several hundred people, and all these American trial lawyers were fighting to get to India, and anyway, it was just a big circus. And I wrote the first 100 pages, and I just loved it. I thought it was going to be a riot to just write about these colorful trial lawyers. And I showed it to my wife, because she reads everything I write first. And she said, "I cannot stand these people." And I said, "Okay, I'll show you." So I sent it to my agent, who's my next, we've been together for 30 years. So David Gurner. David read it, and he said, "I can't stand these people." So I can't fight both of them. Both of them didn't like the book. So I tossed it.
It's a hard thing to do when you're invested in that way.
Very hard. But it was smart, because it didn't work.
So how you have written now, you have just sort of distinct sort of John Grisham subgenres. You've written historical novels, you've written some sports novels, your what you call your beach books, the Camino Island books. So how do you decide what to write next? Is it something that catches your eye? Are you deliberate about it? Do you say, I need a break from something, or I really miss these books?
Well, I'm going to write a legal thriller every year. Starting from January through July, I'm going to write the legal thriller. And that's priority one. I'll turn that in around the 1st of July, and it takes about 6 weeks of editing and revising and publishing, production, to get it finished. I'm involved in some of that, some I'm not. So by mid-August, I'm done with it. And by Labor Day, I'm bored. So I'll start writing something else in the fall. A kid's book, the Theodore Boone series, a sports book. I love sports. Two of the Camino books now, Camino Island books. There's probably one more to come at some point in the future. So yeah, I get really bored after Labor Day if the book's finished. It's before publication. Publication's always, middle of October. And from 7 o'clock in the morning until 11, if I didn't write, I have nothing else to do. There's nothing else to fill that time.
What the hell else would you do? No, I understand exactly.
Get in trouble. And my wife wants me out of the house by noon, so I drive to. We live about 10 miles south of Charlottesville, way out in the country. That's where I write. That's where we live. And I come to town where I am now because the internet's better here downtown, and I have an office here. I check in with New York to do some of the business work, and then go play golf. And that's a typical day. But again, those morning hours there's nothing else to do. I can't sleep late, so I have to get up and do something. So I'm always writing.
It's just the default after 30
Yeah, it's
years.
a default position. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Theodore Boone books. These are middle grade books. The first book is Theodore Boone, Kid Lawyer, and middle grade is 9 to 13. And I think that's such a tough audience. So what got you started with that, and kind of what's different about writing for that audience?
I had never heard the term middle grade before until I wrote the first book. And they said, this is middle grade. I said, what does that mean? They said, 9 to 12, 9 to 13. I said, okay, that's what it should be. That was the market I was aiming for. Kind of a neat story. About 10 years ago, my daughter is a school teacher, and she had her first class. She was about 24 then, fresh out of college, and had her master's, and she couldn't wait to teach in a public school in Raleigh, where she lives. She had her first class of fifth graders. My wife and I helped her get her classroom organized. We bought books. We bought the whole Hardy Boys series, 84 of them. We bought the whole Nancy Drew series, like 30 or 40 of those, and donated that. So she had a nice library. She was really going to push reading and literacy because that's the way she was raised. And over dinner one night after she'd been teaching for a couple of weeks, she asked me, Dad, could you write suspense for kids? She said, there are a lot of books for kids, some mysteries and historical fiction and fantasy. And there's a big library for, kids. And I never thought about that. And so I started thinking about how could I write a book for kids? And I came up with this idea of Theodore Boone, who's a 13-year-old kid. Both of his parents are lawyers. He's an only child. They practice law together in a small office in a small town. And he has an office in their office. He thinks he's a lawyer. He knows every cop in town, every judge, every lawyer. For him, a fun time is going to watch a trial, not a ball game. He loves to be in the courtroom. And he wants to be a big time lawyer or either a judge when he grows up. And he gets in trouble because he cannot resist the temptation to give free legal advice to his friends and their older brothers. And so he's always got some mess going. That's Theo Boone. He's always going to be 13, and he's always going to be the kid lawyer.
So is that a different process for you, or is it just, the subject matter is different a little bit, right? It's the 13-year-old problems are
Right.
not, 40-year-old problems. So, but do you, I haven't read a lot of middle grade, but I do read a fair amount of young adult, which is sort of for high school readers.
Right.
And I think those books have to be so tight and streamlined. I think that's a hugely difficult thing to do. Is there something different for you? And are you telling yourself something different along the way?
It's easier in that the books are shorter and the plots are simpler and the characters are not as complex and the vocabulary is, throttled back a little bit. Certain words you shouldn't use, when you're writing for 10-year-olds. They're more difficult to write at times because you're constantly trying to find the voice of a 13-year-old kid. And that's not easy. It was a long time ago. Although when I was 13 in the 8th grade, it was one of my best years ever. I was in a great school, had great teachers, great friends. I was on the football team, basketball team, baseball team. I was in Boy Scouts. We just had a ball. And it was the last year you're really a kid, because the next year you go to high school and you're a freshman and you grow up so fast. But I want to say 13 forever. I just love being 13. So I remember that vividly. And so when I write about Theo, sometimes I'll write something that Theo says or thinks, and then I'll say, wait a minute, could a 13-year-old really think like that? So that's kind of the challenge, is to write and think like a kid again. So that's constant. That's a constant pressure to get that right. And I've received some nice criticisms from parents and readers who say, this is a bit too complex for a 13-year-old kid, whatever he said or did or whatever. So I listen to that.
So in a way, the impulse is the same as writing a Jake Brigance book, right? It's sort of taking yourself back to a time in your own life in a way that has some weight and meaning for you.
Yeah, it's just similar. It's similar to that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so you you come from, I don't know, I guess it's been described as sort of a blue collar background. Your father was a farmer. He worked construction, right? And as a teenager, you worked at a plant nursery, for a plumbing company, on a road crew. I appreciate that because my first real job was as a roofer's helper, which is also a very glamorous job.
That's a tough job. That's a tough
Yeah.
job.
But I made my living swinging a hammer for 15 years after that. And so do you think that background and those jobs influenced your work, your characters? For me, I sort of think of Jake Brigance in particular as sort of a blue collar lawyer, right? He's in debt. He's never getting paid. He's kind of a living paycheck to paycheck in a way. So talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, he's what we call a street lawyer. That's what we called ourselves back when I was practicing law. We call ourselves street lawyers. We're our little shops are on the street, and we take what walks in the front door, and often you don't get paid, as opposed to the big firm lawyers who are in the much nicer places, and even in a small town, they're bigger firms, more money, bigger clients. Then you get to the big cities, and you've got the mega firms, and so yeah, we were proud to be street lawyers. We represented people. I think from my parents, I got the drive and the ambition to just to work real hard. My dad, we left the farm when I was 7 years old, cotton farm in Arkansas, and we left in the middle of the night because we had finally run out of money. And my dad got a job as a bulldozer operator with a really good company that moved us around every year or two to a different job. And so we were always moving. I had great parents. They were always together. We were always in church. We were always clean and well fed. And my mother's favorite saying was, anybody can afford soap. So she never had any patience with people who things that were not clean. But my dad, with 5 kids at home, as a bulldozer operator, he worked a double shift almost every day when I was a kid. He worked very hard. He later became a dragline operator, later became a salesman, and later had his own company. And I remember 10 years later in 1970, he paid off the last debt from the farm bills. And he wasn't proud. He was not proud. He was a proud man, but he would never let you know it. And I remember he and Mom had a moment. They told us we finally paid off all of our bills from the farm, and we're never going back to the farm. So that's the kind of person. Those are my parents, and their dream was for us to go to college. All 5 kids, all of us made it, and we were expected to work hard, live frugally, live well, save your money. The golden rule: treat people with respect, and that's the way I was raised.
Yeah, it's I don't know, it's interesting to see the way people's, sort of the way your life, not yours in particular, but writers' lives percolate into their work. And then people also, I think readers feel, and I've certainly done this myself, feel like you're always writing about yourself. And that certainly is true to some extent, but it's not just the protagonist that's like you, right? Every other character has some aspect of you as well, right?
Hard to say. I mean, you don't want that as a writer. I have a hard time as a writer developing the really complex, bizarre, unusual, strange characters. I mean, I can give one humor and a colorful personality. But the really intense psychological thriller, I have a hard time doing that. I really have a hard time doing that. I just don't have the patience to create those types of characters. I want the pages to turn too fast, and you can't. When you write suspense, you can't let your reader get weighted down with a lot of character development, a lot of description of place, time, and things that don't really matter. That's something I struggle all the time. If a section is going too slow because I'm trying to put the reader inside the head of a character, I'm probably in trouble. So I keep that pretty light.
Well, maybe in comparison to some, but I like A Time for Mercy. There's quite a bit of character development, and there's a very vivid sense of place. I mean, the pages do turn, but I was reading it. I was thinking about Steven Spielberg's line about filmmaking, which is tell a story on a moving sidewalk. Right. The goal is to sort of do everything at once. And I think that's something you do very well, is you advance the story while giving us bits about character and place, and it all kind of adds up along the way.
Yeah, you get more place and character in the Ford County books than anywhere else, because I've written so much about these people. It's easy to know them and to describe what they're doing and to write about them more. Those books are different. I think those books are better because of that. But again, I'd still love the really fast-paced legal thriller, where the pages turn and the reader is up all night. That's what I enjoy doing that.
Yeah, that's my favorite compliment from a reader is, you ruined my night's sleep. I stayed up way too late to finish. That's, to me, the ideal.
Or called in sick for work, or skipped school, or
Yeah. So I think writers are really start out as readers. So what was the first book you fell in love with as a young reader? What was the well, and maybe a second question, which is, was there another book that you read that first made you say to yourself, I want to do this. I want to write a book or a story?
I was never inspired by other writers to write because I didn't plan to write. I didn't. This is not a childhood dream. This is not something I studied in college. I just never thought about being a writer. I was always a big reader, just because I love reading, and I've yet to meet a writer who's not a voracious reader. That's what that's part. It goes with the job description. But I had other dreams. They were all unrealistic. One was playing for the Cardinals, and had no talent whatsoever. So that barely survived high school. And I grew up in a very strict Southern Baptist home where everything was illegal or immoral. I couldn't wait to get away from home. So I got to college and partied pretty hard for the first 2 years and wasted a lot of time, but it was necessary for me to do that. And about halfway through college, I realized I can't keep doing this. I've got to get serious about studying. And I decided to go to law school, and I was off and running. Again, throughout my entire college law school experience, I never thought about writing a book. Now, I love John Steinbeck as a writer, and I was inspired by his books were inspiring. I loved some of the early commercial guys, Robert Ludlum, the thriller master, people like that. I've always read a lot. But I was inspired to write by a courtroom scene I saw one time as a lawyer. And I thought, change a few facts. This would make a really fantastic story, a very compelling drama. And I became obsessed with it. And finally said, okay, I'm going to try to write this. I was 35 years old. I had never written anything before in my life. And so I did it for 3 years and got it finished. And A Time to Kill was published in 1989. It was a total flop originally. But I was in the habit of writing. And so I had one more book to write before I quit. And that was The Firm. And The Firm came out in March of 91 and changed everything.
And you never looked back since?
I have not looked back since. I quit the law. I quit the politics. I have never looked back. Still writing.
Well, let me see if I can pull up one question here from our, before we need to get out of here. Here's a good question. What do you read for fun?
Oh, wow. I'm all over the map. I read a lot of nonfiction. First of all, I don't read. Fun is the only reason I read. I'm not going to read something that's not any fun or something I have a big interest in. And I have a big interest in law-related topics. We've discussed many of them, you know, wrongful convictions, death penalty. I read a lot of those books and magazines and articles online. I enjoy some other nonfiction books. Guys like Michael Lewis, you know, great writer, David Grant, Hampton Sides. One guy I'm really enjoying is a British guy named Ben McIntyre. He writes these all historical. They're all like historical narratives, narrative historicals, or whatever you want to call them. True stories about World War II, espionage, spies, soldiers. He can pick some really fun topics, and the books are just really enjoyable. I like mystery, police procedurals, other courtroom dramas. Scott Turow has always been a big favorite of mine.
Yeah.
Read his last book, thoroughly enjoyed it. So I look at a lot of stuff. I read a lot of stuff.
Well, I think we are about out of time here because you've got to get off to the next thing.
On my way to Houston, Texas, I think, for the next.
Oh, well, say hi to Murder by the Book for me. Those are lovely people.
That's where I'm going. I'm sorry. I'm going to, my next stop is Poison Pen Booksellers in
Scottsdale, Arizona.
Scottsdale, Arizona. Yeah.
Yeah. Say hi to Barbara for me. She's lovely.
I've never been there. Have you been there?
Oh yeah, a bunch of times. They're great people.
That's the fun thing about the tour. You get to go to all these wonderful bookstores, and I'll come to Boswell's one day.
Please do. We'd love to have you in person.
Thank you, Nick.
All right, Daniel, walk us out here. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for giving me a little bit of a little mini. We'll look forward to seeing you someday in person. Thank you so much for a wonderful conversation. As I said, the books are sign tip-ins. If you order from us on the link that's there, you can pop it out now, or I think you're going to be heading there when the event's over. We'll get it right out to you. And don't forget about Nick's book in January and January 12th. And we're looking forward to John Grisham's next book too. So thank you all for coming. Wouldn't have a bookstore without you, virtual or otherwise. Hope to see you at another event. And as you said, you can continue the conversation. I guess you can register for the Poison Pen event now. So Grisham all day.
There you go.
Think of a better time.
Thanks, Nick. See you down the road.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Daniel.
See ya.
Bye-bye.